What's up everyone, how's it going? This is Waj, and in this video we'll be doing a direct head-to-head comparison between the 2015 version of the MacBook Pro versus the 2015 version of the MacBook Air. Both of these computers have just recently came out, and let's go ahead and do an in-depth analysis and see what the major differences are between these two. This video is going to be really great for any of you guys that are interested in perhaps upgrading to one of these MacBooks in the near future, and hopefully this will give you some sort of guidance on which computer best suits your needs. So without any further ado, let's get right into this comparison. Now, ironically enough, in terms of the physical dimensions, historically the MacBook Air has always been a little bit bigger than the Pro in terms of the overall footprint. And this year is certainly no exception, where the MacBook Air is a slightly taller and wider than the new Retina MacBook Pro. Additionally, both computers are the same in terms of thickness as we've seen from the previous generation MacBook Air and Pro, where the Air measures about 17 millimeters at its thickest point, and the Pro measures about 18 millimeters throughout its entire profile. Now, in terms of weight, the Air is still lighter than the Pro, measuring about 2.96 pounds, versus the new MacBook Pro measures about 3.48 pounds. Now, in terms of the ports and connections, the new MacBook Air is pretty similar to last generations, with the exception that now you have Thunderbolt 2 connectivity. So if you have Thunderbolt devices that support the higher bandwidth, you could transfer your data back and forth up to 20 gigabits per second, and you still have the standard array of ports such as 2 USB 3.0 connections, a headphone jack, and a full SD card slot. Now, obviously the MacBook Pro has a lot more connectivity options compared to the Air. We have 2 Thunderbolt 2 connections. We have a full size HDMI 1.4 connection, which is good for 4K resolutions at 30 Hz refresh rate. It would have been nice to see the new HDMI 2.0 protocol, but unfortunately that's not the case. Now, apart from that, we still have a full-size SD card slot, 2 USB 3.0 connections, and a headphone jack. Now, one connection that is missing from both computers is a USB Type-C connection. Would have been really nice to see that integrated into these new models, but I bet Apple is probably saving that feature for future iterations of these two models. Now, one of the big standout features of this new 13-inch Retina MacBook Pro is the inclusion of the Force Touch Trackpad. This is a completely new redesign of the MacBook Trackpad that we've been seeing for countless generations, and what they've done is they've eliminated the hinge mechanism that you've seen in, let's say, a trackpad on the MacBook Air that has a hinge on the upper portion of the trackpad, and you can basically click down on the bottom portion with no problem, and it gives you a nice satisfying click sensation. But if you go to the very top of that, you basically can't get that same click sensation, even though you can click it down. But now with the new trackpad, the whole area is consistent in terms of its clicking feel. And in fact, they have eliminated that top hinge system itself. So now essentially the entire trackpad is one large click button. The other thing they've done is they've integrated their Force Touch technology that we're going to see in the Apple Watch into the trackpad. So essentially what this Force Click function does is replace the 3-finger tap function that we've seen in OS X. So that means if you're browsing the web on Safari and you come across some unknown information, you can force click on a specific word and get a proper definition for it, as well as a linked Wikipedia article about that topic, which is really quite handy. Additionally, if you come across a link, you can force click on that link and it'll bring up a preview of that web page without having to open it up. Furthermore, if you're browsing through your emails and you come across a new contact that you want to add to your address book, you can just force click on that and do so very easily. If you also come across a specific address, if you force click on that region, it'll bring up the maps functionality on OS X. If you're using your Finder, you can force click on a file and get a preview of that file. And overall, even though I find these features pretty darn interesting, I'm not sure how useful they're going to be for everyday practical web browsing and using the computer on a day-to-day basis. I'm going to have to live with this force click feature and figure out if it's actually useful, and I'll report back to you guys. Now, basically one of the coolest things about this Force Click trackpad is the inclusion of the electromagnetic motors at the bottom of the trackpad. So when you force click, you actually get a small little vibration coming out of these electromagnetic motors that gives you some sort of haptic feedback, letting you know that you have activated the Force Click feature. So the really cool thing about this haptic feedback system is that it gives you a real real mechanical sensation of a secondary or third click. It gives you a real sense of depth and dimension that I've never experienced before. And even though it's a very subtle little vibration, it definitely feels that you're pressing down on the actual trackpad more than is physically possible. So very interesting, and I would love to see this kind of technology explored on more different devices. And to illustrate this point, basically I've hooked up a microphone really close to the trackpad and amplified the sound quite a bit, so you could basically hear my initial click, which is the mechanical real button sound of the trackpad, and then you hear another sound, which is the electromagnetic motors vibrating the trackpad ever so slightly, and it's a very subtle sound, but essentially that gives you that sensation that you're actually clicking down further on the trackpad, even though you're just physically just adding more pressure to the trackpad. Now moving on, let's talk about one of the most important things about any consumer electronics device, and that is the displays. Now, the display on the MacBook Pro is the Retina display, so that means a maximum resolution of a 2560 by 1600. It is an IPS display, so in terms of color rendition and overall viewing angles, it is going to definitely be a much better viewing experience. The MacBook Air is certainly a modest computer. One of the reasons why you pay a little bit less for it compared to the Pro is because the display quality, and it's certainly not bad. It has a native resolution of 1440 by 900. It's the same exact size as the Retina, but it's not IPS, so basically a TN panel. And straight off the bat, even if you're about 2 or 3 feet away, you still can tell the difference between these two displays in terms of clarity and sharpness, and you can see those pixels on that MacBook Air compared to the Retina, which is imperceivable at about 2 to 3 feet away, which is typical of what most people use their laptops anyway. So the viewing experience on the Pro is certainly heads and shoulders above the MacBook Air. Now, when you're looking at straight on, the color rendition of the Air is really not bad, but if you move towards any extreme angles, so if you are watching a movie with a whole bunch of different people, the experience that people are going to get on the left or right of the screen or top or bottom is going to be quite different from the center line of the screen. So you can see that that shift in terms of color and saturation and a contrast is a lot greater compared to the IPS display that we have on the Pro, where it basically is very consistent throughout the range, and it definitely renders colors a lot clearer, and the image is a lot sharper. So in every way, the MacBook Pro has a much better display than the Air. Unfortunately, we do not have an IPS Retina option on the MacBook Air at this point. Now moving on, taking a look at the internal specifications of both these two computers. They're both using the latest 5th generation Intel Core i5 processors on their baseline models. They are clocked in a little bit differently, and they are physically different CPUs as well. Basically, on the MacBook Pro, we have a 2.7 gigahertz Core i5 dual-core processor that can turbo up to 3.1 gigahertz and has 3 megabytes of level 3 cache. Now, the 2015 version of the MacBook Air also uses a 5th generation Intel Core i5 processor, which is clocked in a little bit lower at 1.6 gigahertz, and it also has 3 megabytes of level 3 cache. Now, if you're a heavy-duty multitasker, you'll be happy to note that in terms of RAM, the new MacBook Pro has a new configuration. Basically, we have 1866 megahertz, so that's a higher clock speed than last generation 1600 megahertz of DDR3. We also have 8 gigabytes standard, even with the base model, which is twice as much as what you get with the MacBook Air that comes with 4 gigabytes of DDR3 memory that's clocked in about 1600 megahertz. So again, if you're a heavy-duty multitasker, looks like the MacBook Pro has most of your needs met. Now, in order to evaluate the differences between the internal specs, we're just going to do a couple of different benchmarks to kind of get a feel for the speed differences of these two computers. We're going to start with a Cinebench R15 benchmark, which is specifically going to target our CPU and RAM performance. And as we run through the benchmarks, our results are basically we get about 311 points on the Pro and about 260 points on the MacBook Air. Moving forward, we're going to go to Geekbench 364-bit benchmark, and that's again going to test our RAM and CPU performance. And as we run through the results, we can see a pretty big difference between these two computers. Basically, the MacBook Pro is faster both in terms of the single-threaded and multi-threaded tests. getting a score about 3,200 and about 7,000 on the single thread and a multi-threaded tests respectively. On the MacBook Air, we get about just under 3,000 points on the single core score and about 5777 on the multi-core score. So definitely not too bad. Certainly in terms of the multi-threaded capabilities, looks like that Pro is certainly retaining its name. Now, certainly one of the biggest deciding points of whether you want to go with the Air or the Pro is going to be whether you need a machine that needs to be powerful enough for different tasks that require a lot of CPU horsepower, such as video or photo editing or any kind of multimedia work, or if you do any kind of projects that utilize a lot of CPU and RAM horsepower. But if you're like most people who just use their laptop for general web browsing and maybe some Word documents and PowerPoint stuff for work or school, I think both are quite adequate for that. And if you always need a faster computer, you probably just want to go for the MacBook Pro. But 95% of people out there will be perfectly happy with the performance that you get on the MacBook Air. Now, one of the cool things about both computers is that they both have the new PCIe 2.0 SSD memory that runs at 4x compared to previous generation 2x. So if you're coming from an older generation machine, you're going to notice a huge difference in terms of read and write performance. And to illustrate that point, we're going to pull up our Blackmagic design speed test, and you're seeing a completely astonishing result of over 1.3 gigabytes per second in terms of read speeds and a write speed of over 630 megabytes per second. So that means in some circumstances you're getting faster SSD performance than you can get in any other type of computer, even a custom built PC or even the new Mac Pro. So very impressive, and that really means day-to-day tasks and activities are going to happen a little bit more quicker. Things are going to react a little bit sharper. When you're loading and installing applications is going to take less time. You're definitely going to see a difference if you're coming from a previous generation model or a standard computer that doesn't have crazy fast PCIe based memory. Funny enough, I transferred about 10 gigabytes of information from a USB drive to the MacBook Air's desktop, and it took less than a minute, which is about 2.5 times faster than even what my $4,000 PC is capable of. Now, for those of you who are curious, so we're just going to do a quick boot up test to see which computer boots up faster. So we're going to hit the power button on at the same time, and looks like they're loading up right now. And basically after a couple of seconds, the MacBook Air is about 1 to 2 seconds faster getting to the desktop. And I repeated this test many times and I found the exact same results. So for those of you who wanted to know, it looks like the MacBook Air is slightly faster when it comes to the boot up time. Now next, let's talk about the graphical performance of both of these two computers. Now, by no means are these gaming machines, but you can do some little bit of moderate gaming on them depending upon what kind of resolution you set your games at. Now, technically, the base model of the MacBook Air and Pro are using very similar architecture in terms of their GPU specs. Both have Intel Iris 6000 series graphics. There's a slight performance difference between the 6100 graphics and the 6000 series graphics that we see on the Pro. Mostly is related to the frequency that the main CPU runs at, and to kind of see if there's any difference in terms of frame rates, we're going to run our Heaven benchmark, set the resolution on both computers to 1440 by 900, medium quality settings, no anti-aliasing, and the results are very similar. Basically, we have 18 frames per second on the Air versus 19 frames per second on average on the MacBook Pro. So basically a very small difference in terms of the GPU horsepower between these two. And again, even though these results aren't really impressive by any stretch of the imagination, if you play games designed for the Mac at lower resolutions, you can definitely get by with a fairly playable FPS rating. Now, last but certainly not least, we're going to talk about the battery performance out of these two computers. Now, the MacBook Pro has been upgraded to basically get an extra hour from the previous generation MacBook Pro Retina edition. So now you have 10 hours of a wireless web. And in terms of battery capacity, we have a 74.9 watt hour lithium polymer battery. And in terms of the endurance factor, the MacBook Air is still the king of battery performance. You're getting over 12 hours of wireless web, and it has a 54 watt hour battery. And really, when it comes to traveling and if you're away from power all the time, the MacBook Air is just incredible in terms of battery performance. It's really unbeatable in most circumstances. And even though there's probably some computers out there with huge extension batteries. To get a computer this thin and lightweight and so portable is really quite a amazing feat. And even though you can probably get a computer that has a huge battery that'll last you 24 hours and things like that, I'm sure it's going to be nowhere near as streamlined and as portable as the MacBook Air. And the MacBook Pro is certainly good too. In terms of an ultrabook standard, there's not a lot of PCs that can truly get up to 10 hours of a wireless web. And even though I haven't fully broken in the battery yet, I still got about 9 hours and 58 minutes. And after a couple of days of usage, I got over 10 hours and 20 minutes of battery time just on the Wi-Fi using medium screen brightness. So very impressive and certainly capable and portable laptop by anyone's standards. But I'm that, guys. That's really it. Make sure to give us a thumbs up if you like this video and it helped you out in any way. Definitely let me know on which computer you guys would choose if you're kind of looking for a new laptop. I love the battery performance on the MacBook Air. It's a fantastic overall value, and both of these computers, in fact, even though they're priced higher than most of your Windows computers out there, they really hold their value well. So in terms of an investment standpoint, they're really quite a solid investment for students, or if you do any kind of business or anything like that. I think both have certainly a lot to offer for many different applications. Now, just keep in mind that the new MacBook will be coming in to our office within the couple of weeks once it's released, and we'll have a full-on comparison between that and all the other major laptops that are available in the marketplace, as well as a full review for that computer. So definitely stay tuned for our channel to get all of the latest tech reviews and comparisons if you're still looking around for the perfect laptop. Again, thanks again for watching, and we'll see you later. Take care.